Hey, John Kelly, law enforcement life coach, coming back at you with the Sometimes Heroes Need Help podcast. I got to tell you guys, remember when I started this thing of mine and I said I was going to have subject matter experts speak to you, and not because they've got some lofty degree or a bunch of letters after the name, but because they lived a life, they got bloodied, and they're going to come at you from real world life experiences. I got to tell you, folks, I am humbled and blessed. I've got Cyndi Doyle, and if you don't know who she is, you might be living under a rock, and that's okay. But by the end of this interview, you're going to know who she is. She's an amazing woman. She wrote a book called Hold the Line, The Essential Guide to Protecting Your Law Enforcement Relationship. And I got to tell you, I wish I had this 20 years ago, because I would have saved a lot of heartache and a lot of pain and a lot of needless suffering. I got Cyndi Doyle with me. She's amazing. She's the founder of Code for Couples, which is an amazing program that she puts on to keep us healthy in our relationships. She's an expert in first responder relationships and mental health. Without further ado, I got Cyndi Doyle in the house. Cyndi, it's great to see you.
Hey, John, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, so I've been kind of, not like a creeper, right? But like following you on social media. And I was like, this is a woman who can help so many people. And we got this thing that we can do it on our own, and we got our shit together, and I don't need help from anybody. And that just sets us up for failure in our relationships. And, I said, this woman has put herself out there. She's becoming very vulnerable and telling us what didn't work and her shortcomings. And Cyndi, how did you get to this place? Like, so you're a big shot clinician, therapist, and you got all the accolades, but there was some times that you weren't the big shot. You were trying to figure some shit out on your own. Bring us up to this point so my readers can appreciate the journey.
Yeah. So I have a group private practice. In my practice, I work with couples and individuals. I specialize with first responders. And that came out of the fact that my husband was in law enforcement. And I went through his whole entire journey with him. We were engaged when he decided to go to the academy. And then, he walked out on retirement and retired last year. So
wow, congratulations.
From birth to death, I have been with him through that career.
That is awesome.
And it's not something that I ever expected. I encouraged him. I was like, yes, that sounds amazing. This is all pre 9/11 stuff, right? So yes, go do the thing. But it was about 12, 13 years into our relationship where I started being really resentful for all the things that I was giving up in order for him to do his job. I was tired of the department coming first. I was tired of I had no influence, and it was all about, the phone rang and he went, or somebody else needed him and he was on the phone with them, talking to them and supporting them. But when it came to conversation with me, it was like, fine, nothing.
You obviously didn't read the fine print at the bottom of the contract. That gets you all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. I missed that.
Yeah. Crazy.
But it was getting to a point for me where I realized that my go-to is to protect myself. And so my go-to is to say, screw you. And I can do it all on my own. I can be independent, which is how I survived before I met him. I don't need anybody. And so that's the direction I started going again. And I started seeing that in myself of no, I'm good. Thanks. I wouldn't call him for anything. And there were some pivotal moments that got us there. And I started realizing probably a couple of years later that wasn't who I wanted to be, that I was angry. It wasn't the relationship I wanted to have. Here I am working with couples in my office, and I'm like, oh, turn towards each other and support each other. And you need to spend time talking to each other about what's going on in your life. And here I was with my husband. I was like, I'm good. Thanks. Don't need you.
Feel like a hypocrite.
Absolutely.
Right?
That is absolutely right. And so I started realizing, like, hey, I've tried these things in my own relationship. They're not working because I was a clinician. I work with couples all the time. I do affair recovery. Like I work with like heavy duty stuff in my office.
Right.
And none of the tricks, quote unquote, were working. Like I was like, I don't understand what is going on. And there were these other things that I just didn't like, his behaviors where I'm like, I know he thinks I'm attractive. He tells me my nickname was Hottie McHot. I mean, he would tell me, and I mean, he always told me how beautiful I was, but here we are having dinner and he's like, looking, you can't see me if you're on the podcast. I am, he would look off to the side. He'd follow around in the corner. What's going on over here? And I'm talking to him and I'm like, hello, waving my hand in front of me. And I would just shut down. And he's like, what? I was listening to you. I'm like, no, you weren't. You were like looking at the waitress over there.
I'm scanning the room, baby.
I'm scanning the room.
Potential threat. Yeah.
And so it wasn't until like, right. But I didn't know that. Nobody explained that to me. Right.
Right.
And so it wasn't until later I went to a conference, a mental health conference, and this guy was on stage talking about post-traumatic stress injuries. He was a military veteran, but he started talking about the OODA loop. He was talking about the fight or flight response and what I now know is Cooper's colors. Yeah. He didn't call them Cooper's colors, but now I know that's what they are. He started talking about the OODA loop, and I'm like, huh. This sounds vaguely familiar. Right. And I texted my husband and I said, hey, do you OODA? And his response to me was, where the hell are you?
Right.
And that, like, what are you talking about? But so that was kind of my first enlightenment. And it was after I had that I really started researching. So this was probably 2015. Like I'm 15 years into this career with him. And so 2015, I'm starting to research and I'm starting to find all this stuff. I found Gil Martin's book. I found Ellen Kirschman's book, How to Love a Cop, which had a lot about trauma. And I thought it was so important that there was other things besides that. I love her work. I just wanted to unpack it more. And so I started doing my own research and putting together my knowledge of what causes a connected relationship based upon research, what causes a connected relationship, what causes a solid relationship, what connects an intimacy and attachment. And I started to see how things just didn't match up. If it was a zipper, it would not zip. You know what I'm saying? Right. Like they just didn't connect. They don't line up.
Right.
And then I was like, holy crap. And then after I started doing that, I was like, well, I just can't keep it in my office. I've got to let other people know about this, right? How do I do that? Right. So no better way than like randomly start a podcast, which is what I did. I just randomly like, I'm going to do a podcast and started podcasting. So that's kind of my journey.
I got to tell you, it's amazing when, you're in the middle of something, you're going, I'm really good. I'm an expert at solving everyone else's problems. Mm-hmm. But I can't solve my own. What the hell is going on? And that's what we do as cops. We're experts at solving everyone else's problems with little background information. And we don't apply those same skill sets in our own lives. I wanted to talk to you briefly. I started doing some research, and I want to talk to you about research and the misnomers about law enforcement and divorce rates and stuff, because I think, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you're beaten over the head with, well, you're gonna be an alcoholic, you're gonna get a divorce, you're gonna have 2 or 3 wives, you're gonna have a piece on the side, and you're gonna dabble in this and that. If you hear that enough times, that eventually becomes your truth, I think. And it's kind of weird how that happens, but you've done some research, and I think from the book, a lot of that is some outdated research that is not current with the present tense, and we're still playing that same song. I did some research, and one of the things that I like to discuss in my seminars is suicide. And the CDC, now I don't trust the CDC when it comes to COVID or anything like that, but if they have numbers that are related to death, I'm going to say that you can't fudge those too bad. They say 42%. So I'm going to round up. I'm going to say half the relationships, half of the suicides, a component of that, of completing that suicide, is a breakup in a relationship, the dissolving of a marriage or of some sort. And then I said to myself, okay, that's really shitty. So we don't have a handle on this at all, because it's driving us to kill ourselves. We're failing in relationships, and we're killing ourselves over that. And then the next thing I think about is, so what are we doing proactively, Cyndi, to keep us from intentionally dismantling our relationships? And then for some of us, taking ourselves off this earth because of what we have done, or our inability to have a healthy relationship. And the answer is very little.
Yeah.
Very little. So I think, this book, needs to be part of a proactive approach to mental health and law enforcement for relationships. If that's the where the number one killer of cops is suicide. And the number one reason why we kill ourselves 50% of the time is because of a relationship that's gone south.
And the number one, based upon research, the number one, I don't even know what to call it, the top resiliency method is a strong support system. And that includes a relationship. It includes a marriage. There's research that shows that law enforcement officers that have a safe, happy, healthy home life are far healthier. They're safer on the job. They have more resilience. Because they have a built-in support system. They have people that they can lean on. Right. They know that they have this place at home to come home to. They think, okay, I have this place that I can and take a breath.
Right.
And that these people love me. Now, this is part of it is keeping that way, because even in my own relationship, my husband was clueless that I was upset because I was going through this thing of like, well, I've got to be strong, quote unquote, because right, we have to be strong. And so I would cry in the bathroom. He wouldn't even know, or when he wasn't there. So part of it is having those discussions of like, hey, I think our relationship's just fine because I'm coming home, I'm getting kisses, I'm getting sex. I think we're okay. Are we? Are we okay? Are we good? But having those conversations are avoidant. There's an avoidance to those types of conversations because it's difficult. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. And nobody likes to be uncomfortable, much less the time we have together, the limited time we have together as a couple. We don't want to be like having really difficult conversations.
As you speak, I don't blow smoke, Cyndi. As you speak, you're connecting dots for me in my relationship and why I did what I did. And I was a master at not, and I won't say communicating, because I know you have a thing about what we need. When we say we don't communicate, we were really meaning we don't connect. And I thought that was really insightful. But truly, my position was I had grown up in an alcoholic home, and there was every weekend it was absolutely out of control. I played referee between my parents, and so I the takeaway from that in my family was I'm not going to be that guy, right? So I took care of the alcoholism. 26 years sober, but the other part of it was being able to have a conversation about something that could potentially escalate. So I refused. It didn't matter what was going on. It wasn't even talking about resiliency, being able to talk about a conflict. I would pretend that one didn't exist. You can't have a conversation about a conflict if they don't exist. So,
right.
All I did was just start driving wedges between my marriage, between my Nicole and myself. And,
and can I just mention really quickly, part of that though is also the conditioning that happens in the brain. So if on the job, there's a conflict and it's your job to go in and resolve that conflict, your fight or flight response is going to go off. So you're going to be thinking, you're going to be reacting, you're going to be, as you said earlier, right? Like going in and taking care of other people's problems, right? Like I got to go in and handle this. And so that's conditioned behavior. They're like super highways in your brain, right? Because that's something that you do all day, every day, for the most part.
Right.
And so when your spouse or your kid comes up to you and wants to have a difficult conversation, your brain's going to go conflict, fight or flight. And that's not going to work out well. And it's not because you don't want to have a conversation or you don't care what's going on. It's that your brain hijacks you because of what you do all day, every day. But if we don't know that's what's going on, if you don't know that's what's going on as an officer, if we don't know that's what's going on as a spouse or a family, then I just think you're an asshole.
Right.
Right. And then I'm not going to talk to you. So then I'm going to not tell you anything that's going on with the kids or how they got in trouble at school, because I know you're just going to react and you're just going to go off. And that's not everybody. No. It's not. I mean, other people handle it certain ways, but there is a common pattern of behavior. So
we create our own problems because we don't ever, I like all the things that you talk about. We don't ever take that, that emotional armor off. We walk home with it on, and we don't need it on at home. We can leave it in the trunk. We can leave it in the trunk of the patrol car. And the people at home are not threats. And we sometimes treat them that way, subconsciously. And that's really, for me, it was the beginning of the end. You talked about in the book early on, Thanksgiving, and your husband went to his family Thanksgiving. I go,
oh no, he had them over to our house. It's very important. Oh. He invited them, which I think is important. Okay. So the story really quickly is that I was pissed, and I tried to strong arm my husband into going to Thanksgiving down in Austin, which is about a 3.5 hour drive where my parents are. And he was like, he thought he needed to hang around the PD because, something might happen. And so he lied and said that he was on call and invited his family, who lives locally, over to our house without telling me.
Okay. Oh, nice. Yeah, no, I wasn't going to hang anything on you on that, but you went to Austin, right? You went to Austin for Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah.
He had his parents, and then his mom sent you, like, hey, we
Thanks
had a
so
lovely dinner. We missed you at the table. And, I said, that's some shit right there. I said, then I said, it reminded me of the time that I took my daughter to a wedding in Boston instead of Nicole. And I said, yeah, messed up. I was like, everybody's looking at me at the wedding. Where's your wife? Yeah, because I can't have a fucking conversation with my wife. That's why my daughter's here. Right? Another wedge. And I fucking resented her the whole time I was there. I was motherfucking her the entire time. And I never had the conversation with her. It's just crazy, right? You had said you didn't leave the relationship, but you were no longer in the relationship, right? I left the relationship. I say to people, I never stopped loving my wife. I stopped loving myself. And when I did that, I had no room. I didn't care about anybody. And so I not only was I absent, I did some really shameful things. And I know we talk about the difference between shame and guilt. And I think I had both, right? I was guilty for my behavior, and then I was shameful of my continued indifference and all that. When we start talking about the thing I love about your book is it points out some, like, it talks about theories, but then it goes, all right, this was the technical side of things, and this is what your brain's doing, but this is what you need to do to counteract that and get ahead of it. And these are some things that you can do, like real time, daily, that you can implement so you don't have these issues, or at least you can be aware that there's potential there and you can kind of cut them off at the pass. You talk about the ritual, coming home and some things that you need. I think I've got this theory, Cyndi, that, we need an airlock.
That would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
A place, right, that we can decontaminate before we leave one environment and go into another. And,
Yeah.
And that's, you gave all these pointers about that ritual of coming home. What are some of the things for our listeners that you think are positive things that our first responders can do to mentally transition from the guy they were at work to the guy that they need to be walking in the door?
Yeah. And I would say not only need to be, but want to be. I think a lot of this job winds up slowly knocking you away, like nudging you just like 1/16th of a degree every day. It nudges you off the center into where you want to be. And so I think, it has to be intentional and taking time to think about who's the person you want to be? Who do you want to show up for? When you think of the dad you want to be, the husband you want to be, the wife you want to be, the partner you want to be, whatever that role is that you're showing up as, how do you want to be seen? And are you being seen that way? And what's getting in the way? So I think that's kind of the first step is assessing and determining, because I always think and we do this in therapy, it's like, what's the baseline? What are you coming in at? Right. And where are we going?
Well, what's the goal? So, what are we trying to accomplish here?
Right. What do you want it to look like when we're done? I always ask my clients that. So when you fire me, what's different? So it's the same kind of thing. Like where do I want to be? How do I want to show up? What do I want to be seen as? And where am I now? And how do I start to make small changes? So the first thing I think is assessing that and determining how you want to be. So get that. So once you have that, then it's a matter of, okay, when I come home, I know when you come home, I like that people have to drive home. So it gives them some time to kind of decompress. So the first thing is what you don't do, you don't get on the phone with somebody you just worked with and go, that's some bullshit call, right? And start venting about that. That's not the direction you want to go. It's like, it can be done later. So part of that's fine. It also starts to amp up and drive behavior and your emotions. So I would recommend doing some things that help you to decompress. What can you shift your mind to? So is there a playlist you want to listen to? Is there a podcast? Is there talk radio? Talk radio pisses me off, so I don't do that anymore.
Don't do that. Check.
So is there something that I listen to audiobooks a lot now?
Sure.
So I listen to something fiction that kind of gets my mind going in a different direction.
And so music or something.
No.
No
I don't listen.
Music?
I'm not a calming music girl. I listen to things that I could sing along with. Because singing, I like to sing.
Sing along.
But that may be AC/DC. So
yeah, that would definitely calm me down before I get into the house and start smashing things. Okay, good.
It's sometimes it's just like, I just got to get it out.
Okay.
So that's really important, is to have something that you want to do. But what I really recommend is at least 5 minutes before you reach your house, before you're pulling into that driveway, 5 minutes before, start doing your breathing. Start doing some tactical breathing and start making sure that your system is calming down. And as you're doing that tactical breathing, thinking about, how do I want to walk in that door? Now, I don't mean like close your eyes and visualize you're driving, but start thinking about, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to walk in that door. What's going to happen? Dog's going to come running in. The dog's going to bark and the dog is going to come running in. But you know what? I really kind of love that dog. And so I want to make sure I pet that dog. And I'm not going to yell at the dog. I'm going to love on that dog some. And then the next thing that the kids are going to be there or whatever that normal process is, or maybe everybody's asleep, there's these aspects of like, what am I walking into? How do I want to walk into the house? How do I want to, everybody's asleep. I'm just going to go and just look in on them and go, you're my reason.
Right.
You're the reason that I'm here. You're the reason I show up. You're what I love.
Being grateful.
Being grateful. It's about gratitude. It's about how you're showing up. It's about loving the people and greeting the people that are there for you day in and day out. And you establish that. And then I'm not saying you have to integrate. What's really important is to say, like, this is a period of time. It's a snapshot, right? It's a photograph. And then you're like, and then I need to go shower or whatever you need to do to decompress. But that ritual of coming home is so important because it establishes a foundation. And it's very different to walk in the door and to like walk in with everything else. Of course, that stuff comes with you. Of course it comes with you. Everything that you went through that day comes right in the door with you. It's intention. It's the intention of saying, I'm going to put this aside because I want to show up in a different way. I don't need to spill that over and slosh it over. Think of it as green slime. Yeah. And I know you want to protect your family, right? I know you want to protect your spouse. And so the last thing you want to do is like, you have the green slime and you're going to slime them too. Let's protect them just a little bit from the green slime. Right. And what that does is it kind of maybe starts to heal something within you too. And then definitely go decompress, whatever that timeline is that you have of like 20, 30 minutes to go take a shower, calm down, poop, but that's whatever you need to do.
All an intentional act, right? I mean,
it's all intentional.
You're creating that for you. These are decisions that you are making that, quite frankly, nobody else can make for you. You need to do this for yourself and ultimately for your family. I would also probably add to that. I need to let my Nicole know, hey, when I come home,
oh yes,
don't throw anything at me, please. Give me 20 minutes before you tell me that the washer stopped working and that the dog pissed on the rug and that you had to do this. Just give me 20 minutes to be John and not Sergeant Kelly. Right? Give me 20 minutes.
Yes. And I think that's part of the decompression time. I also think there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. I didn't say one of the other things I suggest though too is, if is to communicate what you're coming home with. Like if it's been a really tragic day, then you're saying like, hey, I'm a 10 or whatever you want to say to communicate, like I'm coming in hot, whatever that is, right? Yeah, right. Like, and so the people who know, they're like, hey, okay, you're coming in hot. What do you need? I need a kiss and some decompression time. But it's also important for them to communicate to you. Right. What's it like there? Oh, let me tell you, it's a shit show. So
what am I walking
just know, right, because, you're walking into, and what happens, unfortunately, is like, okay, you may be walking on a shit show, you're coming in hot, and there's that collision, right? And so now I'm like, listen to me, God, blah, 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 right? Yeah. And that's where it all, but if you communicate ahead of time, it's like, how can we make the best of it? Sometimes just communicating, what do you need? What do you need as soon as I get home? A hug, things like that.
And that's just so honest and raw, right? Like,
and direct.
We don't like, we kind of, I don't know. I don't ever remember, Cyndi, ever having a conversation like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't ever remember. I don't. And to that point, I want to circle back to that about coming home with some trauma and how we navigate those waters. But there's something that you wrote in the book that I got to tell you. I read the whole book in 2 days, and I'm half a moron. So if you're one of my listeners, you can probably read it in a sitting. You had made an analogy and talked about walking in your partner's shoes, and I got to tell you, when I got teary-eyed. I got teary-eyed. You're like, you ain't
Mm.
talking about shoes. What the hell? No, not talking about shoes. Not talking about shoes at all. When you say we need to stand in each other's shoes, that brought a tear to my eye because I never did that. Not not once did I even make an inquiry what it was like to be the wife of me.
Yeah.
And I told you before we started recording, I went out to the kitchen and I grabbed Nicole and I said, I know sorry is kind of
Mm.
empty. I said, but how the fuck did you stay with me? Why did you stay with me? I did everything in this book. I did the exact opposite. And you're still here. We've been together for 30 years, married for 27. How did you do it? You know? And her response was, well, can I read that book? I said, you know what, baby? You could have wrote the book. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, you can read it. It's going to validate some things for you, and it's going to, reassure you that what you did and what you went through wasn't for nothing. And I just, that's crazy, that whole concept, Cyndi.
I'm glad it connects. And let me tell you, part of that, it's just not for officers to stand in spouses' shoes. It's also for spouses to stand in officers' shoes, because there are these aspects where I can think about, okay, yes, you're on calls all the time. You're doing the thing, right? But then when I sit and really like try to stand in those shoes and like, what is he engaging in on a daily basis? And there's many times some holes, because sometimes I think officers tend to not share because they think they're protecting their family.
Right.
And there's a point to that. And then there's other times where it's like, how am I supposed to know if we don't share?
Right.
There's also the aspect of, when we're both hurting, when two people are hurting, what we do is we protect and we defend ourselves. And so standing in somebody else's shoes does not come naturally, because our instincts are to protect.
Right.
And so then there's blame and everything else. So it goes both ways. But I love that you connect with that metaphor of standing in shoes. One of my favorite images that I have is my assistant is standing in her officer's shoes. He's in the military. She's a former police officer. And so she has it from all backgrounds, but she took a picture of her standing in his combat boots. And we use that as a social image
powerful.
sometimes.
That's powerful. Yeah. It really is.
I've got to get my husband in my heels one day is what I have to do.
I was going to say, listen, I'll break an ankle if I try that nonsense. So everybody's just going to have to be cool with visioning it and not actually seeing it. God, I want to touch, since we kind of like we're dancing around it. I read in the book, there's a lot of talk about being vulnerable and sharing trauma, and that your spouse, you're saying, like, by not doing that, you're saying that your spouse like really can't handle it, but isn't deserving of you opening up that way. I know I'm kind of butchering it, but close.
It's all right. You're doing just fine. Yeah, close.
And I told you, like, I was like, listen, I put a big question mark on that. And I was like, I put it in a pen, no fucking way, and I was like, oh, this will be something interesting for Cyndi and I to talk about, because I want to give you my perspective and then I want you to tear it apart. Fair enough?
Perfect. Yeah. Right. Love it.
So I never, unless it was on the news, I had, over my career, I had 3 attempts on my life over 30 years. So all 3 of them made the news. And so there wasn't much hiding that from my wife. Hey, how was your day? I'll put on Channel 7. I'll tell you about the brain matter and all the bullshit later. So I couldn't get around those times. And I found that those times were devastating. It was the reality of what we did. And so the times that I said, well, there's no way I'm telling her about tonight. She'll see a uniform covered in blood, and she'll go, "What happened?" Some just nothing heavy duty, just some bullshit. Somebody cut their finger and it got all over me. And I agree that you need to share, but I would put this caveat, this like condition, like I need to tell my spouse that I had a really shitty night, that I need to communicate that I am really not good right now. And I don't know that we need to delve into the specifics of the trauma. I held a dead baby that was getting beat. He was dying in my arms. I never told my wife that story. It only came out after 20 some odd years, and she saw me crying one day and she was like, "What are you crying about?" And I was like, "This." She was like, "Oh, you never told me." I was like, "All right, why the fuck would I tell you about the baby dying in my arms?" Right? So I think we need to communicate with our partners, but I think we need to be very measured. And like, I think maybe depending on the relationship and what your spouse can handle, I say, it was just a really bad night, or, some shit went down and a bunch of people got hurt. But I need to talk. So I would argue that I need to talk with people that are used to holding broken bodies. I need to talk to my peers. I need to talk to somebody that's not going to be impacted by the trauma. I don't want to fuck my wife up because I'm already fucked up. And so that was like my stance. Like, you know what? I get it. We got to share, but I'm not betting that you're going to be, if I'm having a hard time dealing with the trauma, I'm not going to gift that to you. I'm not going to say, "Oh, here you go, baby. Have this image of a kid dying in your husband's arms for the rest of your fucking life." I'm not doing it. And so that was like, I penned the shit out of that section. I'm like, I got to talk to Cyndi about this. I got to figure it out, And so that's kind of my take on it. Have I lost my mind?
No, I actually disagree. Not disagree. I actually agree with a lot of what you're saying. The key to what you were saying, though, is that you were sharing it was a bad night. You were sharing. You can share, and I think couples have to talk about what's okay to talk about, because my breadth of holding space is way different than somebody else's breadth of holding space because of what I do all day, right? And so that's a little different. So there's that. But I think spouses, it's important. There's two main reasons I'm going to say. There's probably more, but I'm going to go with two right now. One, we're in this together. I signed up with you, right? You were joking about you didn't read the fine print of the contract. And part of that fine print of the contract is that, there's going to be some shit. And I'm going to, if I don't know of it as a spouse, what you're doing, and you're just coming home, because I hear this a lot, people come home and there's like, same shit, different day. Okay, well, if I don't know what that is, if I don't know that you had to go to a child crime call or a dead child call or anything like that, right? If I don't know what you had to deal with today, then I can't stand in your shoes.
Fair enough.
So there is that aspect of understanding, like, hey, I need to understand. And then another aspect of understanding that is that I have, I use one of my first responders. He's a firefighter, but he was staring at a wall for 4 hours. He was staring at a wall. And his wife's like, "You need to call a therapist." She had no idea what he had been in. He came into my office and shared everything with me. And I said, "Well, what does your wife say about any of that?" "Oh, she doesn't know." I'm like, she doesn't know? I mean, that may be important for her to understand where your mental psyche is, to understand, like, I had to deal with 5 deaths in the past 5 days, or I had to deal with horrific critical incidents in the last however many days, right? Or somebody was injured at work, right? So all of these things that happen, if we're part of your resiliency and we're part of your support system, we have to be cued in on what to watch for. And to know, like, oh gosh, all of a sudden you started drinking a whole lot more. I'm picking on alcohol. You started drinking a whole lot more, or you're playing video games a whole lot more, or you're like detached. And I'm like, hello, like, I don't know what's going on if you don't share some of that. I totally agree with you not spreading the trauma or like re-traumatizing, right? We don't want to go around traumatizing everybody else and causing secondary traumatic stress with our spouses, right? That's not the goal. There can be a conversation about how much do I tell you? How much can I lean on you for? Having that support system as opposed to going to somebody else in the department connects us with intimacy. That is a closeness. And there have been times when my husband has told me about something and I have like had tears running down my face, and he has looked at me, he says, "Thank you for crying because I can't find mine right now." So sometimes in expressing the emotion, it's like, okay, I'm entitled to feel this bad because you are feeling it for me. And that can be a connecting moment. But couples have to have conversations about that.
I didn't look at it that way, Cyndi.
Yeah.
That's really important because we are in it together, right? I mean, right? Nobody does it alone. And and you're talking about your life partner. You know,
right.
So I'm going to move off my position just a smidgen.
Just a smidgen. Because I would say a lot of your position is spot on. I disagree with like coming home and let me tell you all the details. I mean, there were times like when my first years that my husband he'd be like, "Oh my God, do you know what I saw today?" And he would tell me about the brain matter. And like, I know about those first couple calls. I agree. Like, it doesn't make sense to traumatize your family. Right. They do have to be clued in if they're going to be a part of your support system.
And there's a degree of sharing that you can monitor. But I think my takeaway from this is that you have to share. The extent to which you share can be dependent upon the incident, but you staring at the wall, you pounding a 6-pack, one after another, and not saying anything to anybody, is a recipe for disaster.
There's another part that I want to just mention here too, that sometimes when first responders have a bond when they go through an incident together, right? Whether it's a shooting or some other accident or whatever the situation is. And when we connect with people in emotion, right? So it's needed, right? It's nice to decompress. Right. But if now I'm contacting that one person in the department all the time about this situation, it starts to open a door. And so we have to be careful about who we're opening doors with. Does that make sense? So we have to be careful about who we're opening doors with, because once those doors and we feel a connection and a closeness with those people, then it can be a slow slide. And so it's really important to, yes, I can decompress with these people. Yes, I can have that. And then I also need to bring in my spouse. I've had a couple of situations in my office where there was an officer involved shooting. Officer was actually killed in the department, and the commander on scene wound up talking to one of the female officers because she was really close to this officer who passed away. They started like forming this connection.
Of course they did.
Wife was kind of like, "Hey, I'm raising up the red flag." Yeah. Right. But looking at it, he's like, "Holy crap. I was in an emotional affair and didn't even recognize it." Right. Because I was starting to talk. I was starting to feel that connection. And so it's important to is it important to talk to your peers? Absolutely. It's also important to understand, like, okay, sometimes there needs to be a formality in talking to them or making sure that you're also leaning on your spouse as well.
Talk to your ugly peers. The ones you find unattractive. Do not talk to the chief secretary that wears the high heels every day.
Or same sex.
Don't talk to her. Right. That's
Or
awesome.
if you're in a same-sex relationship, talk to somebody who is that safe person. So yeah.
Yeah, good call. I love that. That's really important. I you know, you've come up with so many things, and I don't want to listen. I've got like 2 pages of things I want to talk about with you, and I don't want to keep you unnecessarily because everything that you're saying, there hasn't been a topic that somebody's not taking something away from. Um, you talk about the SWOT analysis. You use like the business terms to apply it to our relationships. Our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, our threats, and do that analysis on our relationships. Um,
And then use the OODA loop.
it's all
Like that's
everything
part of the
pairs,
fun
right?
things. Yeah.
Everything pairs. And it's what I love about it is you're taking a proactive approach to the health of your relationship, and you're
Mm-hmm.
not just letting things happen to you, you're making things happen in your relationship. um, you know for a very long time I was just a spectator. I was just watching shit play out with no input or any real commitment to seeing its health restored. But
Mm-hmm.
you've got the SWOT analysis, you've got that acronym think, which is like a great way to start off. Like, all right, is what I'm about to say, all right, am I going to be true? Is it am I speaking the truth here, or is it an impression, or is it an emotion, or is it a fact? Am I coming from a position of fact? Is what I'm about to say helpful? If it's not helpful, then maybe I need to shut my mouth.
Right.
Am I inspiring? Is it necessary? Am I being kind? And if you're checking off all those boxes, then jump all in.
Move
But
forward. Right.
if you're not, you may need to check yourself before you go down that road. And like that's a practical skill and tool that you can implement
Mm-hmm.
like immediately. Um, I don't. I'm gonna like promote the hell out of this book. I just really, again, I'm not blowing smoke, Cyndi. I I read a lot of books, and there are some that I just go, well, this was written solely for, it was written by a jackass who's trying to make a buck because I don't know, maybe they're in grad school and they need, I don't know what the hell they're trying to do, but they're not speaking from the heart, and the things they're talking about aren't relevant and they're not applicable. uh, Everything in this book has an application to make your life and the life of the people that you love better. And I throw out to you, there was a part that I read, and it made me think of the Serenity Prayer.
Mm.
You start talking about like owning it, and knowing that you have control, and not being consumed with that you don't have control over. And I think that all these things that you've included in this book promote that, that this is why you know you have to play a role in the success of your relationship. It's just not going to
Right.
happen by just because you wake up in the morning doesn't mean that all is going to be well. You've overcome the first obstacle. You got out of bed, great.
You got
But
out of bed. Right. Yeah.
right, but like, what are we doing um, to keep us in a relationship that promotes our physical and mental health? Um, you said what keeps the officer safe on the job can impact negatively on his life on the outside. The whole
Right.
um, the job awareness, and everything that we do at work, it actually works against us in our personal lives. And what this book has done, at least for me, is said, listen, this is what's going on. You may not know that it's going on. There's an undercurrent that I think we're oblivious to, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's really what it is. It's that undercurrent. And the undercurrent most of the time is that conditioning of the brain. It's the things that, like, it's muscle memory, right? It's the stuff that keeps you safe day in and day out. It's what you've learned. It's the mindset that you have to have. It's the cynicism from dealing with the negative side day in, day out. All of that is part of what keeps you safe. And we want you to be safe. I want you to be safe. It also directly conflicts with what causes people to have, or what results in people having a positive, connected, intimate relationship, which is what people want.
Right.
So opening up and sharing, you mentioned the emotional armor, and that we all have emotional armor. However, officers' emotional armors, and I would say I would argue spouses too, in a different way, to let you walk out the door day in and day out as an officer is hard shit, because we don't know if you're coming back.
I never even thought about that. I never even thought that the impact of what I was doing in my assignments that I was volunteering for, how that it never even crossed my mind that would cause my wife sleepless nights.
Yeah. Yeah. So we both as a couple have to take off our emotional armor, but it's going to be extra hard because it's part of what keeps you safe. It's part of what keeps you, empathy. I talk about empathy. Empathy is our ability to feel with people or for people. So when I'm talking about standing in somebody else's shoes, like just like you did right there, you're like, holy crap, I never thought about that, right? To think about what's that like on the other side of letting somebody, that's empathy. You just elicited some empathy because you had that feeling. But if you went around and had empathy for everybody on the job, you'd be a hot ass mess. You can't do that. So your brain learns to do one thing one way. And that is also counter to having that relationship. So it is a lot of work. I'm not going to kid you. But it goes back to that intention, right? I'm going to intentionally be different in my relationship. I'm going to intentionally love the person that I married, or love the person that I chose to be in a relationship with. I'm going to, how can I intentionally show you and connect with you today?
Right.
And that is a lot of what it is. It's doing that daily activity and being intentional of how to course correct when you come off the job.
It makes perfect sense, right? It makes perfect sense hearing you say that now. But for people that are moderately intelligent, it eludes us. It's just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Now it makes sense. I don't know why I was doing the exact opposite of everything that you have in this book.
Because nobody told you otherwise.
No.
Right? It's the same thing for me. I had to go research it to figure out what was going on. There wasn't anything. And that's part of the reason why I decided to write the book, because I couldn't find anything that told me what I wanted to know, which is the why and what to do about it.
Right.
So
yeah, everybody can point
that's
to the
why
problem,
I wrote it.
Cyndi, right? Everybody can point to the problem, right? Right. But
Yeah.
you said, you know what? All right, that's the problem. And I love you for it. You said, well, then I need to find a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And you shared it. You shared that solution. One last thing I want to talk about before I ask you to leave our listeners with a thought. If we don't stand in each other's shoes, chances are there will not be any shoes left to stand in but our own. Boom. Right?
Yeah.
I read that 12 times, and I just said, the goddamn shoes. Back to the fucking shoes. I said, if for me, that's my takeaway. It's just, we get so one-sided focused on everything is our own shit. It doesn't impact anybody else. You know what, you're along for the ride, suck it up. You knew what you were getting into when you married me. All that shit. And you forget that that's a person that is fucking dying inside, watching you and not being able to be a part of the family solution because you're not communicating, you're not sharing, you're not connecting, you're not doing all the things that we need to do to win at this thing. And when I read that statement, it's just like, yeah, man, don't overcomplicate it. Just be empathetic, be open to connecting. And there are a million other things I wanted to talk to you about, but we're like at an hour already, and I'm afraid, maybe we could do this again, like a part 2 or something, if you'd indulge me. Do me a favor, Cyndi. One thought that you could leave the listeners with that I'm going to beat them over the head with this book, so you don't have to worry about that. But one thought you could leave the listeners with that they're driving down the road. Maybe they're listening to this podcast, getting ready to walk in the door. What's something that you could say to the spouses and then to the officers?
To the spouses, I would say, first of all, I would say to both, right? It takes a lot of courage to do what we do day in and day out. I'm going to actually speak to both. That courage doesn't mean that being strong, quote unquote, doesn't mean that we don't talk. It doesn't mean that we walk around with our armor. Being strong actually means that we're willing to talk about what's bothering us. It means that we're willing to do the hard stuff, have those hard conversations. And so strength is about sharing. Strength is about weakness, which is counter to our culture. And so showing your weakness and showing where we're struggling with your partner is where you need to be. And make sure that the biggest thing I would say to officers too is make sure that you are driving where you want to go and not the career driving you someplace else. And that's a big part of it, is that when we know where we're going, when we have that compass lined up and say, this is where we're going to go, then we can continually assess and figure out where we need to be. And it's not eating the big giant whale. It's just small little steps. Stop worrying about big extravagant jewelry or vacations or your wife driving a nice car or whatever you think it is, because what it is, it's just the little things. It's the little things between us. And that's what holds us together, and that's what matters.
Amen. The little things that hold us together. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Before I have an emotional breakdown, I'm going to conclude this podcast because you have been absolutely friggin' amazing. That's an amazing thought to leave everybody with. So we want to find out more about you. I'm going to link all your information in my show notes so people don't crash their cars trying to jot things down. But the name of the book is Hold the Line, The Essential Guide to Protecting Your Law Enforcement Relationship. Cyndi Doyle is the author. And so tell us about some of your social media and how people can reach out to you for some guidance or direction and some of the things that you're doing. You're nonstop, but not to add more to your plate, but when you're good, you're a victim of your own success, right?
I'm active much more active on Instagram, but on Facebook too. And it's the same. It's code for number 4 couples. So code for couples on Instagram or on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. I'm also on LinkedIn, and that's, I think it's Cyndi Doyle LPC, but my name is spelled with a Y. So it's CYNDI Doyle LPC, which is licensed professional counselor. But you could probably link to John, and I'm linked to him, and you could just connect with me there on LinkedIn if you want to. So
absolutely, if anybody needs Cyndi's information, we'll make sure.
And the same website, code4couples.com is my website. So
Code for Couples. Ladies and gentlemen, Cyndi Doyle. Cyndi, thank you for your time. It has been a pleasure. And I appreciate everything that you're doing for our first responders and our families and keeping us safe and healthy mentally and physically. Thank you so very much.
You are most welcome. Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.